Hello everyone, and welcome to the Centre for Applied Theology and to the second of three book launches by three women theologians which are taking place over a series of weeks. We've already launched a book by Patricia Rumsey, and in a couple of weeks' time we're going to launch a book by Patricia Kelly. And keeping the theme of P, we are, for perfect alliteration, today launching a book by Pauliina Pylvänäinen. The publication of any book is an important moment in the life of the Academy, particularly when it's doing groundbreaking research. And so every single volume in this series I would consider to be an important event when it appears. But Pauliina's book is particularly important because this issue, women and the diaconate, is now very much a live issue in the Roman Catholic Church. And not only is it a live issue, but the whole idea of historical inquiry and women in the diaconate is a live issue. So for once, we have a book that can grab the headlines. And so without more ado, I want to turn us over to Bart Code, who is going to speak about the book. And Bart is Professor of New Testament Studies and Early Christian Literature in Tilburg University in the Netherlands. Bart, please speak to us.
Thank you, Thomas. In front of me on my table is the book that is to be placed in the center today. This book is an adaptation of Pauliina's dissertation, defended in Joensuu. We met several times in Joensuu, where her supervisor Esko Riokas had been promoting the study of the diaconate for years, and it invited the study of and had invited me to his conferences several times. I had already the honor of being her opponent during the defense of her dissertation, and since then we have stayed in contact. And she asked me to contextualize her work in an introduction to her book in the broader search for the meaning of the diaconate, first and foremost that of the first centuries. And now I have the honor to do the same today. I want to assess two elements. First, based on my own story, I want to contextualize Pauliina's book, and I want to do so as a part of the broader study of the role of diaconoi in the early church. Two, I want to highlight a merit of the book, a merit that might be somewhat underplayed for the, because of current events, understandable interest in the role of deaconess. But there are other things to mention today which are worthwhile. I do that contextualizing by telling something of my own story. And when I studied theology, one of the most pleasant places in the former Catholic Theological University, Amsterdam, was the library. And in that library, the most important books of all different theological disciplines were therefore taken. While working on my doctoral thesis for the New Testament, I would browse through the corner of philosophical books as a distraction. In an older corner were the books of the Henry Bradshaw Society, a whole row of all kinds of editions of liturgical books that had fallen into disuse for centuries. The Henry Bradshaw Society was founded in 1890 with the aim of publishing new editions of rare liturgical text. Before 1980, they could not be bought in bookshops. Only members, either private persons or institutions, received all publications. One day I was leafing through, as I now recall, the Messale Bobbicensis. In it, I read something about the robe of the deacon the pneumatic. The two bands with which that robe is adorned represent, according to the text, the Old and the New Testament. And I think something was also said about the fact that the deacon was related to the reading of scriptures. It was the first time that he realized that the task of the deacon in ancient church were also connected with the scriptures. At that time, it was only 10, 15, 20 years ago that the office of deacon has been restored as an independent office in the Roman Catholic Church. In contrast to the ministry of priest and bishop, it was open to married men. The pastoral theologians searched for a specific uniqueness and found it in the deacon model of the Protestant churches and developed a social profile for the renewed ministry. I remember going as a young theologian to the Episcopal delegates of the Netherlands, delegates for the new diaconate, to point out that this concept of deacon as social worker could not be based on the sources. It was not appreciated. After my doctorate, I went to Rome to write a dissertation on the interpretation of Old Testament in the New. And I came across the word diakonos in a special place. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus writes about himself in his book Jewish War that he is a diakonos. Later, Vespasian returns to this and even calls him the diakonos of the voice of God. Would that not mean that Josephus sees his being a diakonos in connection with the scriptures as the word of God? I thought I have to assess that after finishing my dissertation. When shortly after finishing my dissertation, I saw in the Oxford University press leaflet an announcement of a book on diaconia, written by a certain John Collins. I cut out a piece about it. I put it on my desk and wanted to request the book for a review, but it did not happen. First, an article had to be written on another subject. Then a son was born, another article, a daughter came along. But even after 5 years, when it was too late to write a review, the cut-out leaflet remained always on my desk. Maybe I can borrow it from the library, I thought. But there were again other duties. We received twins. But when I saw in 2002 that a new book by Collins was being published, I decided to review it. You may show the PowerPoint, James. Okay, go on. Then no. Okay, James, can you show the PowerPoint? We are already too late, but okay. So just do it, and so here and then this is the Bobbio Missile. This is the Henry Bradshaw Society. Go on, yeah. This is Flavius Josephus, and these are the books of John Collins. We go a little bit further. Go on, yeah. And even before the review appeared, Collins sent me an email from Australia saying that he wanted to meet me. He was in Europe that summer anyway. That email was the beginning of an exchange of ideas with this passionate man, and it also led to me organizing a conference with Professor Paul van Geest and the Augustinianum, the Pontifical Institute for Christianity, Early Christianity in Rome, about the word diaconia and about deacons and deaconesses. And Adalbert know he was there also very prominent. The conference volume led ESCO to ask me to speak in Jeonju, which in turn resulted in new projects. Collins and Henschel studied the biblical roots of diaconia. At the same time, scholars around the world began to study the sources of the deaconesses. You can see here too, Dorite Reiner, and with a foreword by Cardinal Lehmann, and in the States, Madika and Osiek. But for me, it became clear that if you want to say something about deaconesses, then you also have exactly to say something about deacons. And then it appeared that those sources were hardly assessed. And Benjamin Bruton agreed with me. And here you see the sources of deacons are not assessed, but there are also quite a lot of questions around the role of deacons in history. Here you can see the Queen, of course. And do you know that she is wearing a dalmatic? And why? And the other is the dalmatic of Charlemagne. And it seems to be that also the French kings wore a dalmatic during the coronation. And next one, the next, okay. And here you see why is in Flemish paintings the angel wearing dalmatics of the deacon stole. And do you know that even in the 19th century, that's the other, you could go to confession to the deacon in the Lutheran Church of Görlitz. That's at the right you see the Beichtstuhl der Archidiakons. So the confession chair. So it's even in the Lutheran Church in the 19th century there were still deacons. And go on, the next one. And here the permanent deacons were still in the 19th century. You can see here Cardinal Antonelli and Cardinal Mertel, and both were only deacons and not priests. Why did they do that? So you can see that there are a lot of elements around deacons which were not known. And if you want to say something about women deacons, you have to know also something about deacons. And those sources were hardly assessed. And nowadays, a whole network of scholars from all over the world with very different backgrounds is trying to catch up. And Pauliina is part of that network, a network that has an important foothold in Joensuu, the place where she defended her dissertation. I hope that Pauliina's book will attract a lot of attention, and rightly so. A lot of attention goes to this kind of book because it assesses the position of women in the past. However, that focus on the position of women should not cause another important result of this book to be neglected. And that's what I want to say, to stress in the last minutes of my talk. And I want to briefly mention. I would like to point out today also how Pauliina incorporates in a fair way a second recent development in the study of early Christianity, the renewed thinking about relations between Jews and Christian traditions. Instead of the more traditional model of parting of the ways, Pauliina shows that there is also another model possible, the ways which never parted. Within Christian literature, one can find a lot of elements which are part of a common tradition of Judaism and Christianity. An example of such a common element is, of course, the use of reference to the so-called Old Testament. Pauliina uses this model as a key to new understanding of the Apostolic. Can agree with scholars like Gerard Rauwers, he is also here, and Piet van der Horst, who argue that the compiler used Jewish liturgical text, albeit in a modified form, to attract those people who are on the edge of Jewish and Christian community. Because of her sensitiveness, she can read such a document in a total new light. And this opens the door for a real new perspective on this important source. So not only about the deaconesses, but also about Jewish-Christian relations. Pauliina, you know I'm very happy with your book, and I wish not only you, but also the book good luck.
Thank you, Bart, for that wonderful introduction to the book and to the whole question of the diaconate in the church. Many people forget that the Henry Bradshaw Society is still alive and well. All its volumes have this very exciting looking type of cover. Yeah. In fact, they all look exactly the same. Yes, and if you're interested in the sources of the liturgy, joining the Henry Bradshaw Society is a very good idea, and we'll find some way of telling you afterwards how you do that. Bart, thank you very much.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. I go to the meeting, but I will try to come back, and my wife is going to look to the rest of the story.
Okay. Good luck with your meeting.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. And now let us move to another theologian who is rereading early Christian texts in terms of how women are presented or not presented or mispresented, and that is Dr. Patricia Rumsey.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to congratulate Pauliina on her achievement. Her work is a very important study in its own right, as we've just heard. It's exhaustive, it's thorough, it's meticulously researched. It's a brilliant addition to the study of the historical place and ministry of women in the church. But perhaps even more significant is the timing of its launch right now. As Tom pointed out at the beginning, in the RC Church, it could not have come at a more appropriate and sorely needed moment. Pope Francis' original commission on women deacons, which he first set up in 2016, it was then disbanded due to disagreements between its members. And it's been on, off, on ever since. The commission was reformed in April 2020, although the members are now of a more conservative bent and apparently not that favourable to the consideration of the ordained ministry of women in the contemporary church. However, there is abundant evidence that women did serve as deacons in the early centuries of the church. The Apostle Paul mentions such a woman, Phoebe, in his letter to the Romans. There's abundant epigraphical and archaeological evidence. From funerary monuments, we even have the names of many of these women. Women like, I quote, the devoted deaconess Athanasia of Delphi, who lived a blameless life and was installed as a deaconess by the most holy bishop Pantamianos, and the slave of the Lord, Theopropeia, perpetual virgin and deaconess of Christ, who has completed a life ascetic, zealous, and distinguished in the Lord. One of our own sisters in the community here has taken the deaconess Susanna as her patron, and she gave me the details. They're from the old Roman martyrology, so they might not be terribly accurate, but she's presented as being the daughter of a pagan priest and a Jewess who was converted to Christ, and she was made a deaconess at Eleutheropolis in Greece, where she was martyred under Julian the Apostate. Pope Francis remarked at the close of the Synod of Bishops on the Amazon region, when he committed to further study on the topic, he said, "I'm going to take up the challenge that you have put forward, that women be heard." Previously, in May 2019, Pope Francis had delivered a report from the original commission to the International Union of Superiors General. This report was never actually made public, but he stated at that time, I quote Pope Francis, "I cannot make a sacramental decree on women deacons without a theological, historical foundation." So to approach this question more intelligently, rather than relying just on feelings and emotions, which can run rather high. We need all the information, both historical and theological, that we can accumulate on the subject of women and women's ministry in the church. What was the ministry of women in the early church? What did women like Phoebe of Kentre do? I think we're all familiar with the fact that women were responsible for baptizing the women when candidates for baptism underwent total immersion and were naked, and when anointing with oil was not simply hands and forehead. But Pauliina uses the early church order, the Apostolic Constitution, as the basis for her study, and by analysing it in great detail, shows that there was far more to the ministry of women than this. She sets out the ministry of female deacons under 3 headings: teaching, liturgical, and charitable, and shows that women were actually extremely active in many practical ways in the church of those early centuries. But what relevance, if any, does this have for our situation today? Why do we need to look at the historical evidence for women deacons laid out so convincingly and so thoroughly in Pauliina's study? Why do we need to study history? I think we can say that, first of all, history can shed light upon the past. Without demanding that we replicate exactly what our ancestors have done, we can look back at the past and make better sense of the present. A knowledge of what has gone before can help us to think constructively about our current situation, without feeling that we need to copy our forebears slavishly. We need to know where we've come from in order to make good decisions about where we're going. And then history can be liberating. It can set us free. Our centuries-old tradition has never been fixed and static and unchanging. Fidelity to our tradition doesn't mean simply doing what was done in the immediate past, copying what the last generation or two did. History gives us the long view. It shows us other possible options. It helps us to think creatively about current problems and to find fresh solutions. And history can be inspirational. To read Pauliina's study of what was achieved by women in a world which was much more of a man's world than a great deal of our world today is, it can show us what it is possible for women to achieve. The women we find in Pauliina's book, they instructed converts, they taught the faithful, they catechized, they visited the sick, they cared for the poor, they practiced hospitality, they acted as couriers between the new churches, they baptized the catechumens, they gave blessings, they laid on hands, they anointed with oil, they functioned at the liturgy, they prayed for the living and the dead. So these are all reasons why this work is so important, why it's so needed today. Thank you, Pauliina, for inspiring and encouraging women in the church today by showing us in great detail the various ministries carried out by our sisters long ago. Thank you and renewed congratulations.
Thanks, Patricia. Our third speaker is in many ways the person we are most honored to welcome to this book launch. He and his book have already been mentioned by Bart, and that's this book, Diaconia by John Collins. In many ways, the whole study of ministry in the early church took a new direction when in 1990 this book was published. Not only does he look at the whole question of the diaconate, but many other long disappeared ministries are examined. For instance, the Huperites, long forgotten, except for a passing reference in the first verse of Luke's Gospel. And in this book, on pages 69 and 70, he has a little summary of what you can find out about the diaconate in the Apostolic Constitutions. So a page and a half in this book can be said to be the genitor of this entire book. Since the word diaconia has become almost synonymous with John Collins, it's a great honor to welcome him here today. John. John, can you unmute and say something to us?
I hope so.
Oh, brilliant.
I didn't do anything. Anyway, you can hear me. I'm honoured to be among you on the occasion of the publication of Pauliina's book. Not having read it, I'm not in a very good position to review it. The book and I have had to establish a safe COVID distance between us. Sent 3 weeks ago from Finland, it has yet to touch Australian shores. But I do have a copy of Pauliina's earlier work, and I was very happy to recall here now that she spent a few hours in this room where I am, my little mini library, where I do such matters as study diaconia. Now, it's one thing to talk to theologians about deacons, and quite a different thing to talk to deacons about deacons. Theologians expect a speaker to say something different, and if they don't hear that, the first thing next morning in the coffee room is poor old John, he never has anything to say. Talking to deacons about deacons is very different. Some of you are deacons, but you are deacons with broad theological minds. Among you, differences of opinion are welcome because differences of opinion provide opportunity for growth. Deacons who are not theologians, however, are mostly of the same mind. And if the speaker disturbs this mindset, the speaker can expect a little trouble. I speak from experience. In 2005, I took time off in Melbourne to present a paper in Kansas City, which I believe is in the United States. The occasion was a national conference of directors of the diaconate. Many deacons who were not directors filled the hall. The setting was Roman Catholic. The text for my paper was Luke 22:27, I'm among you as one who serves. Has anyone heard recently that the Greek name for a deacon, diakonos, means a table waiter, and that this is a lowly, humble role, and that Jesus set the example here? Well, the paper after mine was by none other than Bill Deitwig, and he was speaking of the kenosis of the deacon. In short, from Philippians 2:8, Jesus emptied himself, kenosis, to become a slave. His point was, this is the model for deacons. The model I presented contradicted this, and in the street as we left that evening, half a dozen deacons stopped me to complain about what I had been saying, and there were some angry faces there, and maybe a firm hand on one of my arms. For Luke, Jesus is the teacher of disciples. At this table, he has made himself the model of how discipleship works. He has broken the bread, he has given a piece to each disciple. Luke writes that Jesus then says, among you, I am like the waiter, hos ho diakonon. We often read that the basic meaning, the Grundbedeutung of the verb diakonein, is to wait at table. We use waiter for a person in English, and service and serve for the activity of the waiter. In English, the shorter Oxford English Dictionary lists 34 meanings for serve. Meaning number 22 is wait on a person at table. Number 30, to make a person satisfied or content with food. We also learn that the English word serve derives from servile terms in Latin, servus, meaning slave. Slaves do what they do because they are under orders to do it. That's it. The slave's attitude to the person does not come into it. However, because diakon words continued to be considered part of slave terminology, diakon continued to be understood as signifying service that is lowly. In this estimation, then, diakon words remained slavish words. But early Christians added new Christian values to the meaning of diakon, because Jesus' own service to God and to the needy was a loving service. Wilhelm Brandt was writing in the early 20th century. His dissertation was published in 1931 as Dienst und Dienen im Neuen Testament, service and serving in the New Testament. In making diakonos specifically Christian terminology of service, Brandt was initiating the canonization of the modern diaconia, a terminology for loving, lowly service of those in need. The canonization was complete a few years later with the publication of the second volume of the Theologisches Wörterbuch in 1935, the English translation not until 1964. In the mid-19th century, a significant element of the German evangelical renewal was its dedication to the diaconia of diaconate as a loving Christian social service. It was sustained largely by women from the 1850s, and the story of these deaconesses, so designated, is impressive. What I've called the process of canonization of diaconia began in that heartland, in the hearts of the new deaconesses. Wilhelm Brandt was chaplain to the deaconesses of Bethel, and in 1931 he wrote for them about the diaconia of Jesus at Mark 10:45. He said, diaconia is one of those words that supposes a thou, not a thou with whom I could establish a loving relationship with, but a thou before whom I have set myself as diakonon. Brandt's evaluation of diaconia in 1931 was seized upon in 1935 by H.W. Bayer, and Bayer applied this interpretation to the vast theological word book, the Kittel lexicon. We read there of Mark 10:45, diakonein is now much more than a comprehensive term for any loving assistance. It is understood as full and perfect sacrifice, as the offering of life, which is the very essence of service for others. That's 1935. In the popular commentary, contemporary South African lexicon by Lowe and Nieder, Greek-English lexicon of the New Testament based on semantic domains, we read, the Son of Man came to serve people. These perceptions and evaluations persist to the present day, and the celebrations of the exaltation of diaconia also continues to this day. In lexicons, exegetical dictionaries, and international conferences. And the status of diaconia as an expression of lowly, loving, and specifically Christian service appears to be unassailable. This also means that any attempt to present a different perspective to the semantic dimension of diaconia is likely to be repulsed because of the varied and institutionalized opposition to change. In this area, the powerful influence of the enormous and admirable Diakonisches Werk within the evangelical churches of Germany is incalculable and irresistible. The place of diaconia within the church is not a problem just for the EKD, it is an ecumenical problem. The problem is so great that it inhibits rethinking about church wherever diacon terms appear within that context in the New Testament. There we see, for these leading passages. What is the mission of Jesus? Mark 10:45, diaconia. Are there deacons in Acts 6:1-6? Diaconia. Where does ministry fit within the gifted church? 1 Corinthians 12:4-6. What is the nature of ministry advocated by Paul? For example, 2 Corinthians 5:18. Who are the ministers? Ephesians 4:11-12. In 1961, the year before the opening of the Second Vatican Council, the Third Assembly of the World Council of Churches was held in New Delhi. This assembly organized its program as a trilogy of koinonia, martyria, diaconia. In 1963, during the Vatican Council, Lucas Vischer of the World Council of Churches Faith and Order Commission advised the Vatican Council of the significant role played within ecumenism by the values expressed by the term diaconia. Thus, in the Council, the Council's last document on the Church in the modern world duly announced that the earthly ambition of the Church was to carry on the work of Christ, to serve and not to be served, diaconia. This, of course, refers to the Christ of Mark, who came not to be served, but to serve. This service being diaconia, and the object of the diaconia is people. Similarly, in its first major document, Lumen Gentium, 1964, the Council established that the bishop's office, no less, is in the strict sense of the term a service, which is called very expressively in sacred scripture a diaconia or ministry. Further, and more recently, in his first encyclical, 2005, Pope Benedict XVI wrote on God's love and its place in the church, very beautifully in many ways. He pointed to Acts 6 and the choice of the 7. This event not only marked the origin of the diaconal office, number 21, but diaconia, the ministry of charity exercised in a communitarian, orderly way, became part of the fundamental structure of the church. How can you destructure such a situation? In 2018, Pope Francis echoed this perception in an address to Geneva, marking the 70th anniversary of the World Council of Churches, stating that the work of our Christian communities is rightly defined by the word diaconia. It is our way of following the Master who came not to be served, but to serve. Long part of the core of the German evangelical renewal in the 19th century was its dedication to the diaconia of diaconate as a loving Christian social service. Since the 1850s, their story is impressive. This is where the process of canonization began, in the heartland, in the hearts of the new deacons and deaconesses. And in Wilhelm Brandt was a chaplain to these deaconesses in the 1920s. He advised them that the diaconia of Mark 10:45 was one of those words. Sorry, I'll leave that, we've had that. Brandt's evaluation, oh goodness. Thought I revised this. In the Roman Catholic scene, we are conscious of the vast assembly of such alternative convictions to those which I have developed. In the Roman tradition, the recent Roman tradition, the International Theological Commission spent 10 years investigating the rise of the diaconate. Its report opened with a confession of difficulties in terminology, page 9, but does nothing to address or even identify this. In its reference to the meaning of the diakon, words which it cites are exclusively from German studies, but not Dr. Annie Henschel's. Two views dominate scholarly evaluations of diaconia in this document: the Bayer article of the Theological Dictionary, Kittel, and Eduard Schweitzer, Church Order in the New Testament. The semantic estimation of diaconia and its relevance to diaconate mirrors that in Gerhard Müller's own study, Priestertum and Diaconia. He was the cardinal in charge of the church office. How do we cultivate a new vision for the future, a vision that is based not on an inherited understanding, the Felix Culpa, as Annie Henschel called it, but on a renewed evaluation of what Paul offered in his diaconia of at-one-ment, from atonement, 2 Corinthians 5:18. The diaconia of atonement in the person of Jesus, who came to serve his God in giving his life. How do we cultivate a new vision for the future against this whole resistance from institutions? I congratulate Pauliina on her book. I look forward to its arrival through the COVID era. I think she would be conscious of the difficulties faced by authors who have the right answer to questions that some people seem to suggest should not be asked. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We're here to launch Pauliina's book. So without more ado, let us turn over to Pauliina and hear from her. Pauliina.
Thank you. Actually, the story began already in 2008 when I was pondering for the topic of my master's thesis. And then I didn't know anything about the early Christian female deacons, nor about these commissions, which will be established by Pope Francis, or almost anything like that. Not anything about his Catholic discussions at all. Well, Sorry, something unexpected happened, but yeah. Well, when I pondered about this topic of my master's thesis, I was very fascinated about two ideas that concerned the early church. At first, I was fascinated about the thought how the early Christians differentiated from the other people in the Roman Empire. I had heard that, for example, the early Christians did not get rid of the unwanted newborn babies like the other people in the Roman Empire did when they killed them. So I was fascinated how they appreciated life and how they took care of each other. So this was the first point I pondered. And the another one was that I thought that the way the early Christians interpreted Bible was the right way to interpret Bible. And now I know how simplified idea this was. And actually, this is not that simple, but I thought so then. And I was interested in how the early Christians interpreted Bible, how they took the writings in the Bible to the practice. So this was the 2 points. And I had been thinking about these ideas for some weeks or months or so. And then I thought that now I want to discuss with my teacher about these topics. And that teacher was Esko Ryökäs. And I was happy to see that Esko is here now as well. And I thought I told about these things to Esko, and then Esko listened to me carefully and peacefully. And then when I stopped, he said that, wait, stop. now I really have to concentrate on this topic because this comes so close to my main interest. And then what followed was a lecture about John and Collins, the paradigm of reinterpreted deacons, and so on. And that was the start, and that was how it followed. And I thought that, okay, I didn't know that I had been thinking about so topical ideas. So that is something I really want to get focused on. And actually, I don't remember anymore how we came up with the Apostolic constitutions, but that was what I started to study in my master's thesis. I studied the Apostolic constitutions and the concept of clergy and the female deacons and so on. And when I finished that thesis, when I decided now I have to stop this and now I have to give it away, I felt very strongly that I'm not finished with this. I had so many questions which were still unanswered. And I thought that maybe someday, somehow, I have to work with these themes again. And it took 2 years, and Esko sent me a couple of hundreds of maybe emails and encouraged me to continue with studying the topic, and always asking, how are you? What are you doing? What do you think about this? If you could start again and begin your work. And then after 2 years, I started. And at first, I felt a bit lonely because I thought that no one else is interested in the same topic, that I'm the only person in the world who is interested in this kind of old, ancient things. And I really thought that, I don't know if this makes any sense. This is only my own interest, and this is the only reason why I'm doing this. But then came May 2016, when I had been working with these topics about 2 or 3 years. And that day when we heard, and the world heard, that the Pope Francis has established this commission, the first commission to study the female deacons. And suddenly my own interest was a worldwide topic. And I felt like now the world is interested in the same topic as I have been a couple of years already. And what was very, what was the most happiest thing for me was that the central source for the first commission the Pope Francis established was namely the Apostolic constitutions. Yeah. And since that, I have been working with a topical theme, but at first it was just a personal interest. I was fascinated. And yes, and since that I have get familiarized with very many people from around the world. I have, for example, visited John and Collins in Australia. What a wonderful moment. And so I don't feel lonely anymore at all with these things. I'm so happy to see you all here. And thank you for coming. And thank you for all who have helped me with this work. And yeah, I don't have any words to describe the feeling. Yeah, thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Pauliina. And I'm looking at all I can see many people clapping silently
Yeah.
behind their muted microphones.
Yeah, thank you.
We've heard from 4 scholars, and what unites them all is a commitment to the study of historical theology and to engaging with theological questions using all the tools, and their complex tools, of the historian. And that's why this book has appeared in this series, which is the study of the tradition, the handing on of theology, and its studies in early and medieval historical theology. Every year, I get applications, people come to me just to discuss doctorates. And they say they're interested in topic A or topic B. It could be something from the early Christian world, could be something in the patristic world. Grace in St. Augustine. And I said, okay, first thing, learn about North Africa. While you're learning about North Africa, get your Latin up to scratch. You'll have to be able to dialogue with Augustine sources. So it's time to start thinking about Greek. Also, if you're going to work on North Africa, a lot of the work is done by archaeologists. You kind of have to get used to archaeology. Find out how digs work. Understand stratification. How good is your sense of chronology? Dating, in other words. And you can see the student disappearing. I've always felt it was best to tell the students that learning the auxiliary disciplines, as they used to be referred to in Rome, is not the way. You have to become an expert in the methodology by which we can adequately get questions posed to the sources and then derive meaningful answers. So perhaps the greatest tribute we can pay to someone like Pauliina, and just tonight we've had discussions of Greek language, we've had discussions of Second Temple Jewish history and Josephus. Bart Coden referred to Latin liturgical books edited by the Henry Bradshaw Society. Patricia referred to funerary inscriptions and used archaeological evidence. And Pauliina has done an absolutely splendid study of what is a very difficult legal and theological text. One can't just play with it as a theologian. One can't just play with it as a liturgist or a lawyer. You can see why most of the students who come to me, they don't become historical theologians. As one guy said to me a few years ago, it's much easier to just learn German, read Heidegger, and write a systematic treatise. Well, it is. But the reason historical theology counts is the life of Christianity is always richer and more complex than the formal documents it produces. And that is the great skill that Pauliina has demonstrated in this book. She's taken an ancient Greek document, but adequately placed it in its world and then related that world to our own. And so it's an absolutely wonderful piece of true intellectual translation. Bart Janssens, I can see you there with your headphones on. Without you working in the background, so much scholarship just would not take place. Do you want to say anything? I think you should.
Hi, good evening, everybody. This is another Bart. Bart is a very common name in our part of Europe. Well, good to see you all to start with. You will notice that we had to add a last-minute paragraph at the bottom of the foreword. And usually when that happens, it's not good news, because it means that something was overlooked or something went wrong that could not be fixed in the actual book. And so we had, you have to add a paragraph in the final piece, which usually is the foreword. Now, in this case, nothing went wrong. I first, as a publisher, I first learned about this project in November of 2019. We actually started preparing in January of 2020. And just when we were about ready to go to press in April, two things hit us. One was a pandemic, and the other was the creation or the news of a creation of a papal commission. Now, the first meant that we had to delay the production process just a little, and have to say that Pauliina took this very patiently, and I thank her for it, because we were actually ready in April and the book was only launched or published in September, for the reasons we know. But the news about the Papal Commission, of course, had to be acknowledged, and that's the reason for the additional paragraph under the other Bart's foreword. And it's stated in this additional paragraph that we hope that the book will contribute to the work of the Commission, and of course that's very much true. But I personally, and I think we all also hope that the work and the results of this Commission will contribute to the success of this book, because you've heard from people who know much better than myself that it's really worth this, that the book really deserves this. So with all of you, I congratulate the author and everyone involved in another beautiful publication in this very interesting series. So thank you all.
Thanks, Bart, and thanks to the whole team in Braypals. There's only one last thing to do tonight, and that is to say, in reality, it would be lovely if we could all now raise our glasses and toast Pauliina and the book, and then fill the glasses again and continue the discussion in the sense of a true symposium, with the emphasis on the second element of symposium. But alas, we can't. So I'm going to raise a virtual glass at this virtual book launch to a real book. Pauliina, congratulations. It's our joy to be with you and to celebrate this book.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it somehow informative, please be sure to click like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would also love it if you visited the Centre on the web at www.appliedtheology.org.uk and took out a membership. At £20 per year, your membership is one of the main means of support on which we depend to carry out our work. Finally, look for us on social media. We can be found on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Just do a search for the Centre for Applied Theology. We look forward to having you join us.